How could I possibly receive a letter from Diana who has passed away?
I was staring in shock at an envelope in my mailbox at home. The letter was from my mother-in-law Diana, whose funeral we had just finished yesterday. Diana had always been so kind to me since the beginning of my marriage, and I adored her. We often dined out together and enjoyed shopping, becoming close friends despite the age difference. I was heartbroken when Diana passed away suddenly. Even after the funeral, I couldn't fully accept the reality of her death. So, when a letter from Diana arrived, I was incredibly surprised. Rushing to read it, I found something totally unexpected. Firstly, the reason this letter came to me seems to be that Diana had asked the church's pastor to deliver this letter to me after her passing. It instructed me to open the closet in Diana's room at my in-laws' house, revealing a secret door. The letter detailed how to open this secret door. And at the end, it instructed me to open it alone. Checking the time, I knew that Jimmy, Diana's brother-in-law who lived with her, his wife, and their kids would all be out at school or work. I headed straight to my in-laws' house, used my key to get inside, and followed Diana's instructions to open the secret door in her closet by myself.
Thank goodness, it opened.
Relieved that it opened successfully, I checked what was inside.
What is this?
My name is Olivia. I'm a 35-year-old web designer working remotely. 5 years ago, I married Fred, who is 4 years older than me, introduced by a friend, and we still have a great relationship. However, we don't have any children yet. Both of us love kids and wanted to have them as soon as we got married, but unfortunately, we haven't been able to conceive. There was a time when I was deeply troubled and depressed about not being able to have children, but there was someone who always treated me kindly. That was my mother-in-law, Diana.
Olivia, don't overthink it. There's no need to rush. How about we go to the new waffle shop by the station to change your mood?
Diana always encouraged me and spoke kindly to me. She was bright, kind, and empathetic. I loved her for that. Diana saved me many times, and gradually, I worried less about not having children. My desire for children hasn't changed, but we've decided not to undergo serious fertility treatments and let nature take its course. My husband, Fred, often travels for work, so when Fred is away, Diana and I would go out for meals or shopping, just like friends despite our age difference. Diana lived close to where Fred and I lived, in the same house as my brother-in-law, Jimmy, and his family, who have 3 children. Though Diana seemed to get along well with Jimmy's family, Jimmy and his wife often hurled insults at us for not having children.
Olivia, still no kids?
We have 3 adorable ones, you know.
It's like you're dishonoring your parents by not having any. Just cut ties with Diana already.
Brittany, Jimmy's wife, would say such things with a triumphant look, and Jimmy would join in, mocking us.
Brittany's right. Well, Fred has always been a bit of a loser, and even if you had kids, they'd probably be losers too.
In the beginning, Fred and I would fight back against their cruel words. But as they never seemed to listen, we gradually stopped responding. We started to avoid Jimmy and his wife as much as possible. They were awful to us, but in front of Diana, they pretended to be nice. So Diana never knew their true nature. We didn't want to worry Diana unnecessarily, so we never told her about Jimmy and his wife's behavior. One holiday, Fred, Diana, and I planned to go out to eat. We headed to the in-laws' house at the agreed time. Usually, Diana would be waiting outside the front door, ready to go, but not this time.
Huh? Is Diana not yet ready to go out today? That's unusual. She'll probably come out soon.
Fred and I didn't think much of it and waited for Diana to come out. But even after 5 and then 10 minutes, she didn't appear, and she didn't answer her phone either.
What's going on with Diana?
Getting worried, we decided to ring the in-laws' house doorbell. When there was no response, we used our spare key to enter.
Hey, Mom!
Fred called out as we entered, but there was no answer. Feeling uneasy, we hurried to find Diana and discovered her collapsed in a room.
Diana!
I screamed as I ran to her, and Fred immediately called an ambulance. The in-laws' house was empty, as Jimmy and his family must have been out, leaving no one there but Diana. The ambulance arrived in about 8 minutes, and Diana was immediately taken to the hospital, but unfortunately, she passed away. It was a stroke. Fred and I couldn't accept the sudden departure of Diana from our lives. We both cried so much we thought we might run out of tears. However, there was much to be done, such as preparing for the funeral. We couldn't remain saddened and withdrawn forever. The funeral was to be a small affair with just close relatives and family, with Diana's eldest son, Jimmy, serving as the family representative. For Diana's sake, Fred and I began preparations in coordination with Jimmy. Yet, even as we contacted relatives and met with the church, I sensed an air of reluctance from Jimmy. He didn't seem to mourn Diana's death, but at the funeral, he fulfilled his duties as a family representative, at least minimally. However, after a brief chat with the relatives, I immediately called for Fred. Since I left the gathering so abruptly, the relatives looked at Jimmy with displeasure. Furthermore, at the meal with relatives after the funeral, Jimmy was the first to take his seat and showed no intention of standing up again. Even if Fred made greetings, he just drank beer. Brittany, too, was just drinking beer beside him. So Fred and I hurriedly went around to the relatives, thanking them for coming and sharing memories of Diana. Perhaps influenced by their parents' behavior, Jimmy and Brittany's 3 children were engrossed in their handheld gaming devices, laughing loudly and playing with each other, an inappropriate behavior for a post-funeral gathering. None of Jimmy's family seemed to mourn Diana's death. The relatives must have sensed their attitude as they avoided speaking with Jimmy and his wife, choosing instead to share their farewells and memories with Fred and me. Even as the relatives' attitudes changed overtly, there was no change in Jimmy's family's behavior. They kept ordering beer after beer, talking about the inheritance and plans for vacationing during their break. It was disrespectful, considering how much Diana had done for them during her life. I couldn't help but look at Jimmy's family with disdain. The next day, Fred left early to take care of various formalities. Alone at home, I went to check the mailbox for the newspaper and noticed an envelope inside. Who could it be from? I picked up the letter to check, and to my surprise, it was addressed to me and the sender was none other than Diana.
How could there be a letter from Diana?
Surprised, I went back into the living room to open the letter. The letter contained something entirely unexpected. It appeared that Diana had arranged with the church's pastor to send this letter to me after her passing. The letter included instructions to open the closet in Diana's room at the in-laws' house, how to find and open a hidden door within the closet, and the contact information of a lawyer Diana had dealings with. The final instruction was to ensure I opened the closet alone. I read Diana's letter over and over. Though Diana was slender, her handwriting was large and forceful. Indeed, the powerful signature that seemed to embody Diana's very essence made me take a deep, refreshing breath. Deeply moved, I looked at the clock. 9 a.m. The in-laws' house should be empty now. I murmured to myself, quickly got ready, and headed to the in-laws' house. The children should be at school by now, and Jimmy and his spouse likely left early this morning. I saw on Brittany's social media this morning that she and Jimmy were going out together. Despite it being the day after Diana's funeral, they seemed to be sending the kids to school and boasting about enjoying their day off using vacation time. If that post was accurate, no one would be at the in-laws' house. I had to go now. I couldn't be sure when another chance would come. Using my key, I opened the door to the in-laws' house and entered slowly. The absence of Diana's welcoming smile made my heart ache. Holding back the pain in my chest, I went into Diana's room. Opened the closet, and then reached for the hidden door inside, just as the letter had instructed.
Thank goodness, it opened.
I sighed in relief upon opening it successfully, and checked what was inside. There, I found the items mentioned in the letter and an additional document.
What is this?
Looking at the documents, I felt Diana's love and was on the verge of tears. I wanted to stay and cry, but I knew I had to leave the in-laws' house quickly. It would be disastrous if someone were to come back and see me here. That is because Diana's letter had instructed to do this alone. With the documents in hand, I returned home and contacted the lawyer mentioned in Diana's letter to inform them of her passing. Just as I was about to contact Fred and Jimmy's family to see if we could all get together this weekend, I received a message. It was from Brittany. The message said they had important news and wanted everyone to gather at the in-laws' house this weekend. What could Brittany possibly want to discuss? I have nothing but a bad feeling about this. I was skeptical, but it seemed odd to refuse, so I decided to accept Brittany's suggestion. When Fred and I arrived at the in-laws' house over the weekend, I joined the meeting feeling tense. Jimmy and Brittany were smirking unpleasantly, and their 3 children were not present. Likely left with someone else. As soon as Fred and I sat down, they presented us with a document.
This is Diana's will,
Brittany declared confidently. The signature on the will was indeed Diana's, and it stated that all her assets were to be inherited by Jimmy and his wife. It says here that we, the couple, are to inherit the entire estate, doesn't it? So, you guys won't get a single cent from the inheritance. Too bad. Jimmy laughed vulgarly, his face twisted in an ugly grin. Fred was perplexed, but I silently stood up and returned with Mr. Smith, the lawyer who had been waiting outside.
Who is this?
Jimmy and Brittany were confused by the sudden appearance of the lawyer. Fred was also surprised, not knowing the lawyer had been waiting outside.
This is Mr. Smith, a lawyer who Diana had been close with for many years.
I introduced him briefly, and Jimmy and Brittany's expressions turned to anger.
A lawyer? Why did you bring someone like that here?
It was Diana's instruction. She wanted Mr. Smith to help with the property settlement agreement to make things smoother. Jimmy shouted.
We don't need a lawyer.
He slammed his hand on the table and gestured to Diana's will with his chin.
Mom left a will. We don't need a lawyer with this.
At that, Mr. Smith calmly raised his hand. Are you certain this document was entirely written by Diana herself? In response to that question, Jimmy raised his voice. Of course it is. Mr. Smith shook his head sadly at the scene.
This cannot be recognized as a valid will. A holographic will must be entirely handwritten by the person themselves.
Mr. Smith pointed out that the word will at the beginning and Diana's signature at the end were indeed handwritten. However, the rest of the document looked like it had been printed from a computer. The once noisy living room fell silent. In a panic, Jimmy reached for the will and brought it closer to himself. But that changed nothing. The printed, neat text remained unchanged. The handwriting of the signature and the rest of the document differs. Could this will have been forged? At Mr. Smith's suggestion, Jimmy and Brittany visibly trembled.
What are you talking about? We would never do such a thing. Why are you being so paranoid? And even if it was forged, what then?
Mr. Smith responded to Brittany's words.
Forging a will is a serious crime.
Jimmy and Brittany's faces turned pale. They were flustered, shouting incoherences and making excuses. At this moment, Mr. Smith delivered the crucial information. Olivia has a notarial will, so this will is invalid.
What?
Jimmy and Brittany were astonished, their eyes wide open.
What's that? We weren't informed.
The letter from Diana that I had received mentioned that a notarial will was hidden behind the secret door in the closet.
We didn't know either until we received a letter recently. Diana revealed the location of this will in it.
The letter contained not only practical matters but also explanations about why the notarial will was made and why it was disclosed to me. Diana had been feeling her health decline recently and prepared a will, but it seemed she suspected that Jimmy and his spouse might tamper with it. I had assumed Diana was completely unaware of Jimmy and his spouse's true nature, but it appears Diana had some inkling of their greed for money. The notarial will stated that the estate was to be equally divided between Jimmy and Fred.
What? How could she have prepared something like this?
Jimmy and Brittany were in shock, their eyes wide with astonishment. At that moment, Jimmy seemed to have an epiphany and exclaimed loudly,
"That's right! But the beneficiary of Mom's life insurance is me, isn't it? It must be set to me, the eldest son."
To Jimmy, who was shouting with his eyes blazing, I announced in a cold voice,
In addition to the notarial will, Diana also entrusted me with a life insurance policy. I am named as the beneficiary.
Inside the hidden door of the closet, there was not only the notarial will but also the life insurance policy. Jimmy and his wife stared at the notarial will and the life insurance policy in disbelief.
I didn't hear about this. I don't know anything about this.
It's normal not to be notified when the beneficiary of a life insurance policy is changed. Jimmy protested, banging on the table, but Mr. Smith was firm. Fred, looking puzzled, asked me,
When did Mom entrust Olivia with these? I had no idea. Did she not want to tell me?
I smiled at Fred and explained,
It was written in the letter from Diana. She wanted to tell you as well, but it was safer to entrust it to just me to avoid Jimmy and his wife catching on. I see. You and Mom were really close, after all.
While Fred and I were talking, Brittany interrupted us hysterically.
I won't accept this. Why should you, who never even showed Diana your children, inherit her estate? This is ridiculous. I can't accept this at all. That's right. You childless ingrates don't deserve Mom's estate. We lived with her just for the inheritance. It's outrageous to split it. The entire estate should be ours.
Jimmy, too, was red-faced and yelling. Brittany continued with her selfish claims.
We have 3 children, you know? As compensation for not giving Diana grandchildren, you should relinquish the entire estate to us for our children's future. We, who gave her 3 grandchildren, are far more worthy than you. So, the estate should all be ours.
Unfazed by Brittany's fervor, I calmly stated, What you're saying is nonsensical. Please calm down. Brittany, infuriated by my composed demeanor, yelled,
Your smug attitude is infuriating. Just give us the money. Useless woman.
As she screamed, Brittany lunged at me. Fred and Mr. Smith quickly intervened, but Brittany managed to punch me in the head before they could stop her.
Ouch!
Brittany's hands, adorned with several large rings, felt like brass knuckles, causing a dull pain that made me cry out.
Stop it!
Fred and Mr. Smith pulled Brittany away, but she, still unrestrained, reached out to me again in her frenzy.
Give me the inheritance. I deserve it all more than you do. I have 3 children, after all.
Brittany's eyes were bloodshot, her face demonic. Jimmy, encouraging Brittany in such a manner, an enraged Fred called the police.
Go on, do it more.
Soon after their arrival, Fred and Mr. Smith explained the situation to the police. Jimmy and his spouse were then taken away by the police. Left behind, Fred and I thanked Mr. Smith and decided it was best for him to go home for the day. What was supposed to be just a discussion about creating a property settlement ended up being a terrible ordeal. Fred and I solemnly agreed to visit later with some sweets as an apology. Fred was very concerned about me being hit by Brittany, but when I told him that the headache had completely subsided, he seemed relieved. Amidst the tumultuous developments, I muttered to myself,
That was quite an intense experience.
Then, Fred shared his thoughts with me.
You know, Brittany always makes a big deal about her kids. She's always said how great she is for giving Mom 3 grandchildren. Don't you think she's too obsessed with money?
Indeed, Brittany had always overly emphasized her children, and her greed for money earlier was intense.
Well, yes. Even with the inheritance, Diana wanted to divide it equally, but Brittany wanting it all is a bit abnormal. The look on her face when she was hitting me was terrifying.
Right?
It's kind of abnormal.
Fred fell silent, lost in thought.
What's wrong? Is something bothering you?
I asked, unsure of what Fred was getting at.
Yeah. There's something I've been thinking about. I want to suggest to my brother that we should do DNA testing for his 3 children.
I was taken aback by Fred's unexpected suggestion.
DNA testing?
Yes. And I'm thinking of suggesting an investigation into Brittany's background too. Something just doesn't sit right with me. It's just a hunch.
Although I felt it might be unnecessary, I knew Fred's instincts had often been right in the past.
All right. If you think so, let's propose it to Jimmy.
When Fred brought up the matter with Jimmy, Jimmy ridiculed and yelled at him fiercely.
Just because you can't have kids, don't go doubting mine.
Though Jimmy shouted in protest, he snatched the DNA testing information from Fred as they parted, which might indicate some underlying concern on his part. The first results to come in were from the DNA testing of Jimmy and the children. It turned out that the 2 youngest were not biologically related to Jimmy.
I had my suspicions about the youngest since they didn't really resemble either parent, but the middle child too.
Fred was speechless. Perhaps motivated by the results, Jimmy also conducted a thorough investigation into Brittany's background. It was revealed that Brittany had relationships with multiple men even before marrying Jimmy. Moreover, she had recently been discovered by the wives of her lovers, who then demanded compensation from her. Brittany, who spent more time at home than Jimmy, had been meticulously hiding this correspondence. The total amount of compensation demanded was far beyond what could be covered by Brittany's salary or savings. As a result, Brittany was desperately trying to secure Diana's entire estate for herself. Naturally, this led to a violent confrontation between Jimmy and Brittany, throwing objects at each other and engaging in a physical fight. Their confrontation escalated to the point where blood was shed, and a neighbor, unable to tolerate the noise any longer, called the police. The arriving officers ended up taking both parties away. Already under scrutiny for forging Diana's will, now they've committed an assault as well. When the police investigated the 2, it seems they uncovered numerous other offenses, including theft and harassing wealthy individuals. As a result, Jimmy and his spouse were sentenced to prison. Fred and I were deeply troubled about what to do with the 3 children left behind. With Diana gone, we were their closest relatives. We considered taking them in, but ultimately decided against it. The children had fully absorbed their parents' attitudes, openly disparaging us as incapable and childless. The eldest, Ricky, 14, was certainly old enough to understand right from wrong, and even the youngest, at 7, should have some sense of appropriate behavior. Yet, each time they saw us, all three sneered and hurled insults. Even with their parents' arrest and being at the heart of the turmoil, their attitudes remained unchanged.
We'd be doing you childless losers a favor by letting you raise us.
We never expected such words from a 14-year-old. Faced with such hostility, we felt neither love for the children nor the belief that we could raise them to be decent individuals. In the end, we contacted Brittany's parents and decided to cease all involvement with the children. It seemed the children themselves understood our firm stance, as Ricky remarked.
We'd rather stay in a rundown house than staying with a useless couple without kids.
We felt this was for the best, especially since they expressed such sentiments. It's worth noting that we never disclosed to the children the fact that the two younger ones were not biologically related to Jimmy. Whether to reveal the truth or not is something we've left to Jimmy, Brittany, and their relatives. Fred and I decided to use the estate Diana left us to make a fresh start by moving to a distant location. It was a place rich in nature with lots of greenery, and both Fred and I were able to fit in quickly. There's a charming waffle shop near our new home, and every time we pass by, I think of Diana and how I would have loved to take her there if she were still alive. Soon after we moved, I was blessed with the child I had long wished for. When I used the pregnancy test and saw the positive result appear, I couldn't help but shout in surprise and overwhelming joy. Later, when I went to the obstetrician-gynecologist and had it confirmed by the doctor, I was assured that I was indeed pregnant without a doubt. Fred and I embraced, both of us shedding tears of joy. I couldn't help but think how happy Diana would have been if she were still alive to witness this. Additionally, the business plan I had been quietly preparing is progressing well. Both Fred and I are working hard for our forthcoming child, leading fulfilling lives filled with happiness.